so wonderful to see so many people after so many years of not seeing any people. My name is David at Nirenberg. I'm the new-ish director here. This is my first beginning of term, so I'm with most of you, a neophyte. And I want to thank you for joining me for this brief ceremony of welcome. The Institute doesn't really have a well-established tradition of such ceremonies. I think that's because here mathematicians outnumber anthropologists, who have long known that traditional societies use ritual to mark liminal moments, limen, threshold, frontier, moments when we're poised to enter or exit a particular stage or condition of life. Victor Turner, one of a great anthropologist, called such rituals of betwixt and between. And that's where we stand right now, betwixt and between. And he might have included among those rituals, I don't know if he did, but he might have, all of those traditions of commencements by which universities greet their incoming classes, and of graduations by which they say farewell to them. We're not a university, and we have remarkably few traditions for an institution entering its second century, except maybe for tea, where we will all go right after this. But I think it's somehow appropriate to honor with a ceremony our collective entrance into a new year and a new community. So here we are, and I'm really, really grateful for your presence. Now, on occasions like this, some significant philosophy has been uttered. I think of John Dewey's Aims of Education lecture given at the University of Chicago on a commencement in the early 20th century, or of Giambattista Vico's six inaugural orations given at the University of Naples between 1699 and 1707. I think a year was skipped because of plague, but see, it's appropriate. If you're interested in those, they're available in English with the title On Humanistic Education. Now, I don't aspire to anything so weighty as significant philosophy. I'll simply attempt to describe what it is we're celebrating. And what is that? I think every person here will have a different answer to that question. But from my point of view, we're celebrating our entry, or our return for some of us, to a very peculiar space and temporality, a space of thought and a time of mind. We're entering a place whose space-time is different. You can see I've been affected by the physicists around me. It's different from that of the normal world in that it is entirely dedicated to the possibilities and to the possibilities of thought, and specifically to the possibilities of your thought. It's easy enough, I think, to sense the distinctiveness of the space. I don't just mean our residences, our offices, our dining hall, our common room, our new Rubenstein Commons, our school, all designed to hold us together with the potential for both solitude and encounter, and to insulate us from the immediate demands of the world. And I think you'll see soon just how insulated we are from the immediate demands of the world. I also mean the roughly 600 acres of field, forest, and meadow that shelter us from the busyness of the everyday world of utility and action, replacing the purposeful straight lines and angularities of that world with a fractal leafiness and winding paths that invite peripatetic cogitation. And if you think that's incidental, let me just stress that the early Institute faculty formed a committee on wood, and many of them actually blazed the trails. Think of Veblen, the mathematician, with a machete, blazing the trails that we walk today. The darkness of the night sky, the presence of fox and deer, bluebirds and orioles, even the turkey vultures that circle us in fall and spring, they were coming as we all approached. They know something's up. They help us feel that the space of the Institute is not quite that of the world we came from or of the world we'll return to. This distinctive space is in the service of a distinctive temporality. I'm calling it a time of mind. For us finite creatures, the passage of time may be the most familiar and implacable given of our being. But here at the Institute, we can choose to make it unfamiliar, to bend time like a great pianist bends the passages or tempos of a Bach sarabande, to bend it away from the short-term timescales of the everyday world, and in so doing, create the possibilities for the kind of exploration and discovery that is only possible when we are capable of quieting the constant clamor of the cosmos and stilling the rumbling of being. Just long enough to attend to a question that leads beyond the immediate horizon of the present. This distinctive time and space exists with one goal: to create a community capable of knowledge. I think it was Nietzsche who once complained that what most of the world wants when it asks for knowledge is, quote, that something strange should be reduced to something familiar. And he called this the error of errors. The greater discovery lies in becoming aware of our most basic assumptions so that we can question them and make them strange. You're entering a community that exists to offer you the capacity for that estrangement and that discovery. This has been the goal of the Institute since its founding. I'm not making this up. To assemble a collection of thinkers capable of producing, through their talent, proximity, collaboration, and conversation, and diversity of approaches, insights and discoveries that could not otherwise have been produced. Their commitment was not, the founders' commitment was not to consensus, but to what we today call viewpoint diversity, so that there could be a real testing of ideas rather than ideological or disciplinary complacency. I'm going to give an example I've used before, but it always strikes me in discussing what the economics faculty should look like. In 1931, Abraham Flexner, the founding director, suggested that the Institute should recruit the best Bolshevik economists, so Marxist economists, it could find, since ideas are tested through disagreement. I submit that that idea remains as radical to most departments of economics today as it did in 1930 or 31. So we who are assembled here constitute the community of thinkers collected for this coming year, waiting to be surprised by the direction in which our thought and our diversity of dialogues will take us. The Institute rightly prides itself on the fields that have emerged from those dialogues, often enough between disciplines. This summer, we celebrated one such. It was titled 50 Years of Number Theory and Random Matrix Theory, product of a tea time chat about the zeros of the Riemann zeta function between Freeman Dyson and a young Hugh Montgomery. Or to take a better known example, the economist Oscar Morgenstern and John von Neumann met not over tea, unfortunately. Well, maybe it was over tea, but it wasn't at tea time here. It was at the Nassau Club. That meeting led to their joint authorship of The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. Their stated goal in that book was to create a new science of the psyche, to find laws like the laws of physics that could predict human behavior and to provide axioms for human desire, preferences they called them, as logically consistent as those of set theory. The result was the field of game theory, today used to think about all sorts of problems, from the possibilities of nuclear war, it's being gamed right now as we speak, to the dynamic pricing models that govern more and more of our economies, to the matching of friends and partners on Facebook and Tinder. As I think about that last example, and about the consequences of von Neumann and Morgenstern's conversations for the world we live in today, I find myself wanting to urge you to be as promiscuous and as exogamous as possible in your own dialogues, to reach beyond your intellectual kith and kin. This isn't easy to do. We just celebrated yesterday, the day before, and the day before that, Karen Uhlenbeck's 80th birthday and many of her mathematical achievements in a 3-day conference called Glimpses of Mathematics. And in preparation for that conference, I read back through all of Karen's many reports to the Institute on the time she spent here. In particular, she wrote a report on the special year in geometric partial differential equations, which she led in 1997 to 1998. And she wrote, "While I always hoped for some mixing, the physicists ate at one table and the math people at another. Yes, Dan Freed crossed over routinely and Freeman Dyson did once." She goes on, "I have no clear idea of how to influence this kind of intermingling either between the math community and outside influences, or even within the community itself." In anticipation of another visit to the Institute a decade later, she wrote, "Be careful what you write, by the way, the director can read everything." She wrote that her only regret about her previous visits was not having spent enough time talking to members from other disciplines, a regret she now hoped to remedy. I urge you not to leave here with that regret. Who knows when we get to return, but rather to cultivate those conversations and encounters that have the capacity not only to confirm, but also to transform your own assumptions and thereby our worlds. Let me offer an example. What if, instead of stumbling upon a mathematically inclined Vienna Circle economist, Oscar Morgenstern, von Neumann had chanced upon his colleagues and fellow refugees, the art historian Erwin Panofsky and the medieval historian Ernst Kantorowicz, as they chatted under the starlit Institute sky on a cold winter day of 1952, after coming home from a movie. This is a true story. I mean, not von Neumann didn't encounter them, but they were really chatting. I don't know what movie. I want to imagine it was Rashomon, which was in the theaters in 1952. But so Kantorowicz pronounces, "Looking at the stars, I feel my own futility." Replies Panofsky with his inimitable wit, "All I feel is the futility of the stars." Now, it may not be obvious, but those two were debating the same point that Morgenstern and von Neumann had taken on, though from a different point of view. Immanuel Kant had made a famous analogy between the laws that govern galaxies and the laws that govern humanity. It said, two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. That's actually engraved on Kant's tombstone. Kantorowicz seems here to be endorsing the parallel between physical and moral laws, but Panofsky's quip was a witty spur or rebuttal of those, not a rebuttal really, just a provocation, to those like his colleague von Neumann, who thought that the inner life of human beings can be reduced to laws like those of physics that have helped us make so much sense of the cosmos. For my part, I can't help wanting to imagine what such a conversation might have looked like. Why? Well, for a quick answer, I'll turn to an essay von Neumann published in Fortune magazine. Yeah, some of us published in Fortune in 1955, called "Can We Survive Technology?" In it, it's a stunning essay, and I urge you to read it if you haven't. He predicted that changes in weaponry, communications, and climate meant that the world needed new political forms and ideals if it wished to avoid forms of climactic warfare as yet unimagined. It's not an accident that our special topic in the social sciences this year is climate. The only recipe, he said, for surviving technological change was relying on, quote, human qualities. But what are those qualities? What is human about them? And how can they help us achieve new ideals and new forms of life adequate to the future? To answer those always vital questions, we need the humanist and the social scientist, the mathematician and the physicist, indeed every one of us in this collection of intellects, to be in dialogue under the magnificent sky that is the Institute. I don't want to pretend that such conversations are ever easy. They were certainly not easy when the Institute was founded in the 1930s, a time, as we all know, of economic collapse, discrimination, technological transformation, think radio, think cinema, increasing nationalism, the rising flames of war, a time in which the world of ideas, of universities and research was a battleground. I think of Goebbels' burning of un-German books. They're not easy today either. In a world of technological change, economic uncertainty, the reemergence of borders and other barriers to the exchange of people and ideas, the rising flames of war, mass migration, renewed conflict over the nature of universities, research, and ideas, what we now pithily call the culture wars. All of these forces threaten to intrude into what Flexner called the paradise of scholars, this institute. In a witty letter, then board member Felix Frankfurter, he resigned to join the Supreme Court, cautioned Flexner against using the word paradise to describe the institute, reminding him that paradise had not been a particularly successful experiment and quickly became plagued with serpents. I suppose both were right. The institute is not a paradise. It's very much of this world, subject to the vicissitudes of this world, and dedicated to the study of this world. But the institute is a locus amoenus, a delightful place, a special place, special in its space, in its temporality, and in its constant commitment to the values of untrammeled engagement with and debate over ideas. We should not fear serpents at the institute, much maligned creature, even in these uncertain times, so long as we remain committed to dialogue with each other, even when, especially when, that dialogue takes place across very different convictions and disciplinary commitments. I see this welcome as becoming a sermon. So I'll conclude, and to honor this moment of betwixt and between, I'll conclude with a ritual invocation, but nevertheless, a heartfelt one. May every instant of your coming year in this extraordinary space of research and learning, the space dedicated to the dialogue of ideas, even at their most difficult, bring you a renewed sense of the possibilities for your own thought and your own discovery. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Institute.